When you go to order a coffee to the barista, do you say I want a coffee or do you say I want a coffee in a cup? Whatever you would say, in both cases, you would always get a coffee in a cup. So people don't say I want the coffee in a cup because that is the default argument. So it is a default input. The barista always knows that the coffee should be served in a cup. The same goes in here. We always use this todos.txt file. So why should we mention it always when we order the function, when we call the function, when we order the coffee? So we do that here and there multiple times. Well, there is a solution for that, and the solution is default arguments or default parameters, whatever terminology you use. I'll explain the terminology as well. So to make this a default parameter, all you have to do, and let's start with the getToDo's function, all you have to do is assign the value todos.txt to the parameter. So now this is a default parameter, and therefore we say that this call has a default argument, so we don't have to provide the actual value of the argument. So in this case, both terminologies are used interchangeably. Default argument, default parameter. So therefore we can remove all these argument values from all the getToDo's function, which is 4 of them, like that, and here as well, the 4th one. So if I run the code now and I try, for example, the show method, things will work the same. The benefit here is that if you ever want to change the value of that parameter, you could simply specify the new value. For example, let's say todos1.txt. So I just changed the value in the getToDo's call in the add condition. So let me try the code now. Run main, and I'll try to add something so that this line is executed. So add my new to-do, press enter, and we get an error this time. So it says that no such file or directory, todos1.txt. The error can be traced in here. So first it occurred in line 19. So errors can be read from top to bottom. So this is where the error started, line 19 in here. So Python tried to call this function, and this function itself tried to call something else, which you see in here. So line 2 is the next one to be executed. So this one here. And that line tried to open the todos1.txt file, which does not exist. That's why we get this error in line 2. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that you can change default arguments. You can just give a value here, and that value will replace that value there. So that's the idea with default arguments. So let me go back here and remove that one and remove the value itself. We don't need it. And let's implement default parameters with the right todos function here as well. So file path would be todos.txt, but todos arg is not a default parameter because we're always having a different list in each of these conditions. So in this add condition, the user adds a to-do, they provide it in the command line, and then we read the existing to-dos using that getToDo's function up here, and then we append the to-do of the user to the list. So now we have a new list here, and we want to provide that new list to the write to do's function. So there's no way for the write to do's function to have an assumption on what this value could be. So when there is no assumption, you want to keep parameters as non-default parameters. So that is a default parameter, that is a non-default parameter. Now we have this error here. So it says non-default parameter follows default parameter. So this is a problem, and it can be fixed by putting this non-default parameter before the default parameters. So that is the correct syntax. Otherwise, you will get an error. That also means that you should change the positions of these arguments when you call the function, because what's happening now is if I run the script, run main, and I add my new to do, so we get an error, and it started in line 23 in here. So this is the function call we just wrote, and then it traces back to line 8 where the function definition is. And the error is that this function expected a string, right? Like todos.txt, for example. But in reality it got a list, and that is because the order of the arguments matter here. So if this is the first value you place, that value will go as the value of the first parameter. So todo's arg is actually the string, while file path is going to be the list. So basically what we did is we said file path is equal to the list, which had like multiple to-dos, to do one, and so on. That's what we did. So the open function is confused, and it cannot open a file which has as path a list, so it doesn't make sense. Therefore, you should respect the order now. To-dos should go first, and then todos.txt. Or if you don't like order, what you could do is you could, let me undo this. So if you really want to have the order as you wish, then you could say file path is equal to that, and todos arg is equal to that. So if you explicitly mention the argument names, then you don't have to respect the order. This will work now. So show and add new order, and new order is part of the to-do items. However, I wouldn't recommend this method unless you have to. So just say to-dos first, and then todos.txt. So todos goes to todos arg, todos.txt goes to file path. Actually, since file path is default, as it's a default parameter, you don't even have to pass file path. So you just say todos and that's it. So if I run that, we just made a default arg, show, and that's the new to do. So what we did is now we only mention that file path in there because it is not important. We don't have to pollute our code with unnecessary details all the time. Just like the coffee cup example, you don't have to say all the time, I want the coffee in a cup, because that's the default behavior. So let's see what else should we change here. Yeah, write to-dos, just remove todos.txt and leave only that. Same here. And that's about it. Before I close the video, I want to also emphasize that also built-in functions can have default parameters. For example, if you say help input, you see the help string of the input function, you'll see that the prompt parameter is set by default to a non-object. So that makes it possible for you to just say input without providing a string. So if you say like that, there will not be any string printed out here, no prompt, you just enter this as a user and so on. But if you provide that string will be displayed in here. Some functions though, such as len, so this is a function that returns the length of a list or a string. So for example, hello, it tells you it has 5 items, so 5 characters. So if you do help len, you'll see that this doesn't have a default parameter. So the object is mandatory. That means if you do len without an argument, you're gonna get an error. You see, len takes exactly 1 argument, but you didn't give anything. We would get the same error if we change this get to this function to this. So if you just leave file path as a known default argument, and then in get to do's you don't mention the value of that file path, and if you execute the code now and you try to add a brand new to do, you get an error in line 19 here. So the function call tried to execute the function definition, but it couldn't, because the function call should have gotten 1 argument file path. So I hope that makes sense, that if you have a default value for the parameter, then you don't have to pass it here. Otherwise, you'll get an error. So that's about this video. Thanks a lot. See you later.